Now, is that, can you, that's okay. Okay, good. I'm timing myself here. Christine, you can give me a wave if I'm going, if I'm going on too long. So the project is called the Ignatian Spirituality Project, and it began in Chicago in 1998. Jesuit there, Bill Creed, was asked could he do something for people on the margins. He worked in a retreat house, and so he started this project for people who are in recovery from homelessness and addiction. So I'll just explain a little bit about it. This we had that's a number of volunteers on the project, so it's run solely by volunteers. We had a training retreat about a year ago in Manresa in the Tertianship building, and that was some of the team who are excuse me, part of ISP. Now some of the members have changed since then, but so you can see there our mission is to invite people recovering from homelessness and addiction to encounter God's love, hope and healing through spiritual companionship that transforms. So I could talk for forever on this project, but I'll just give you a few basics on it. So there's an overnight retreat for 16 people, generally 4 facilitators and 12 retreatants. The model is very different, so it's not spiritual direction, and it's nobody gives a talk. It's facilitators share personally about their own experience on various topics, and then we share in the group. So it's a very equal model of spiritual conversation and accompaniment. Obviously there's a retreat program that we follow through, but it's a very kind of we're all equals on it, trying to find God in our life and follow God. So the retreatants are in the early stages of recovery from addiction, and they're living in temporary accommodation, so they're not on the street, but they're technically homeless because they don't have their own home. They've been provided this accommodation, and typically it might be on a year placement. For people to come on a retreat, they need a certain amount of stability, so they might be a couple of months sober and living in temporary accommodation around the city. It also combines Ignatian spirituality and the 12 steps of AA, which would speak about God or your higher power of your understanding. So that's a little bit about it. Now I've kind of just put this presentation together for this morning, and I was asked to look at maybe our own attachments or addictions, or those of people we love, or just, you know, we all have our own attachments and addictions in one way or another. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that now. According to St Ignatius, the inordinate attachments, I'm just going to move my Zoom thing, it's blocking my view here, just a second. So they're essentially unhealthy attachments that limit our freedom to be fully ourselves in relationship with others and with God. So when we experience pain, we can turn to unhealthy attachment to find relief. And during a time of COVID, I think we're all struggling and suffering in one way or another, some more than others. And we might have some time just to reflect on, well, what do I have some unhealthy attachments myself, and can I get drawn into them? So speaking about Ignatius, for Ignatius, wait a minute now, I thought I had another, you forgive me, oh yeah. So Ignatius, believe it or not, was addicted to kind of gambling. He also had sexual misdeeds, and he had quite a temper. So this was before his conversion. And underneath that, there was a kind of a narcissistic pride, and a kind of he was quite a controlling person. And his mother died when he was an infant, and his father died when he was 16. So there are reasons why he behaved in this way. And for those who are recovering from homelessness or addiction, or for any of us, pride may have an influence on our sinfulness. But for those recovering from homelessness and addiction, often it's a huge lack of self-worth, possibly due to a lack of love in early life, and that. So we're all part of this in some way. We're all waiting for the next life to experience the full love of God, but yet these are some of the issues that were present for Ignatius. What was his habits, addictive habits, and then what was lying underneath that. So just to talk about powerlessness now, this is it's big in the steps, and so I was kind of I just want to speak a little bit about Ignatius's own experience of powerlessness. So it was a time in his life when he was in Manresa, I think, that he kept reconfessing his sins. He had already confessed them, but he kept doing it, and it became quite destructive for him. It became quite obsessive for him. And he was really spiraling down into, at one point, contemplating suicide. And so it really affected him and was leading him in the wrong way. But then he realized that this habit that he had developed was rooted in a pride that he was trying to save himself. So he really wasn't handing over his powerlessness to God, that it's God who forgives, that it's God who saves, and that God had actually forgiven him. He was trying to achieve it all himself through his pride. So he admitted his powerlessness over his situation. And then in humility, he allowed God, not himself, to be the source of his holiness. So, and then from that moment, he acknowledged, he turned his life over to God. So if we look at the first 3 steps of the 12 steps, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol or drugs or whatever it is, that our lives had become unmanageable. We came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And we made a decision to turn our will over to the lives of God as we understand it. So there are parallels there with Ignatius's life, admitting powerlessness and turning our life over to God. So for ourselves this morning, we're going to be breaking up into groups after a while, but COVID is a time, I think there are aspects of COVID that we are powerless over. It could be, we could be getting anxious about things that actually we have no control over. Whether it's other people, somebody not wearing a mask, whatever. And then maybe there's other things that we're powerless over. And can we hand the things that we can't control, can we hand those over to God and trust God's power in a sense? And then the other question is, well, are there any maybe habits that you have that you've been struggling with during COVID times? It could be physical, around food or drink or sex or exercise or internet or sleep, to avoid facing myself or God. The different things have a pull on us, and when they interfere with our relationship with God and with other people, then we have to ask ourselves, is there an attachment here? And we can also be attached to thoughts, negative thoughts around a lack of self-worth or even an inflated self-worth. These can be addictive. So, especially maybe in COVID times, we can get trapped in those thoughts of whatever they are. So we need to be able to stand back and recognize them. Maybe we're a little bit powerless over them. So we ask God, there it goes again, hand it over to the Lord. Relationships, money and power. And so that's just a kind of 2 questions, I suppose, there. What might be powerless over you during COVID, and maybe some habits that we might be caught up in. So how are we freed from these habits or addictions? And yeah, I think I showed this slide already. It's the steps. We admit we're powerless over something, and in humility we hand it over to God. And there's a freedom in that surrender. When we hand whatever it is we're holding on to over, we recognize it first of all, that and we hand it over. The grace of God can come in there and free us a lot. Yeah, I'm kind of throwing a lot of things at you, I feel, but listen, I'll keep going here and just we'll see what might strike you from it. So again, I'm comparing the spiritual exercises of Ignatius with the 12 steps or the ISP project. And it's really about freedom. How can we be free to be in relationship with others and God and be fully ourselves? That's what the spiritual life is about. And there are some movements there that help us to do that. What helps us to do that? Now, obviously, these are retreats I'm talking about, but there are movements within those retreats. Experiencing the love of God is huge. It's a huge thing for us, and we experience that in life to a greater or lesser extent. But on the spiritual exercise of Ignatius, it's a key part of the first week. Then on the spiritual exercises, we look at sin and we allow the grace of God in there. And then we follow Jesus and get to know Christ in his life, death, and resurrection. And then at the end of the exercises, we kind of make a choice for the world. We engage with the world. Now, on the ISP retreats, experiencing the love of God is key too. And for people coming on the retreat, it's actually the experience of meeting others on the retreat and the welcoming atmosphere and a non-judgmental, loving acceptance of and sharing that. For some people, it might be their first experience of being listened to in a loving way, and for all of us, it builds on that. So that's a key part of that. Also on the retreat, people move from shame to acceptance. For if people's self-worth is really damaged, then they feel a lot of shame, and we need to move from shame to acceptance. And that's a key movement. And maybe the third one there, isolation to community. I think that's very big for us in COVID. And it's very big for people recovering from addiction, and especially when they're in addiction, it leads them to complete isolation. So that move from isolation to community on the retreat, that is built up, where we become more ourselves with God and share ourselves with others. And finally, on the retreat, we move from the community to outreach. How do we bring what we have received from God out to others? So I think I'm doing okay here for time. I think I have the screen off, so I can't see anybody waving at me, but I think I have a few more minutes. So let me see, what else have I got here? I don't want to overload you, but you know, these are some just pointers for dealing with attachments, addictions. It's not going to be anything particularly new for us, but I think it's important. The first one there, honesty before God and another, that's a huge part of the retreats, of our relationship with God, of our relationship with others. And for those, you know, those of us stuck in one way or another with our attachments, addictions, it's a huge part, being honest. And can we be honest before a loving God or before a loving person? And that can be a wonderful liberation for people when they're not rejected, when they speak about their life experience or what's going on for them. Prayer with the Word of God, liturgy, experiencing the love of God in different ways, a discernment of spirits, and yeah, so there, and particularly the 1 day at a time, I think for the 12 steps, for even for us during COVID, 1 day at a time, you know, sometimes that's just the way we have to take things, and trust, hand it over to God, and trust that God will provide what we need today. And people in recovery from addiction find that very helpful, because we can start be worrying about tomorrow and the next day, but really we just take it one day at a time, and we thank God for what we've been given today. The importance of gratitude, even if you had a really terrible day, there'd be something that you're grateful for, and that's extremely important. So I'll finish up with this. Yeah, just a few things that people have said that helps them, the people in the project. So you can see their connection is very important, isolation to community, phone chats with friends, reconnecting with family, spiritual reading, or there's online book clubs, the outdoors, a very important, nature, spending time in nature, and reaching out to those in need, and finding a group somewhere that you can share those those things that you struggle with and that you take joy in, whether it's a loved one that you share that with, or finding a way, an AA group, or whatever it is, somewhere that you can be yourself and be accepted for who you are as a child of God. Yeah, I'll leave it there, and I'm going to stop share and